In the summer of 2015, a mantis shrimp being filmed in a research tank at the University of California punched a hole through the side of its own enclosure. Not cracked it, punched through it. The glass was aquarium grade. The shrimp was about the size of a hot dog. That's not a myth. That's not exaggerated for YouTube. Marine biologists who keep these animals in captivity have a name for the reinforced tanks they need: shrimp-proof. Here's the part that should really bother you. That punch, the one that broke glass, is not even this animal's most impressive weapon. It's not even in the top 3 most impressive things about its body. This is a creature with eyesight so advanced that military engineers are trying to copy it for detecting cancer. Armor so tough that the U.S. Air Force is 3D printing replicas of it for spacecraft. And a strike so fast that for decades, scientists literally could not figure out how it worked. This is the story of the mantis shrimp, and why the same design that makes it one of the most lethal animals in the ocean might also be the reason it could never survive as anything bigger than a shrimp. For most of the 20th century, biologists assumed the mantis shrimp strike was simple. Muscle contracts, arm swings, prey dies, case closed. Except the math didn't work. Muscle tissue, and no matter how strong, has a speed limit. It's made of fibers that slide past each other, and that sliding takes time, milliseconds that add up. When researchers finally filmed a mantis shrimp strike with high-speed cameras capable of capturing thousands of frames per second, they found something that shouldn't have been possible. The club-shaped arm, called a dactyl club, was accelerating at up to 104,000 meters per second squared. That's over 10,000 times the force of gravity. For comparison, a fighter pilot blacks out at around 9 Gs. This shrimp's arm was pulling 10,600 grams, and it was doing it underwater, where drag should make fast movement even harder. So how does a 2-inch animal generate force like that with ordinary muscle? It doesn't. It cheats. Tucked inside the shrimp's arm is a saddle-shaped spring, built from a hybrid material of chitin and calcium phosphate, essentially a biological composite of shell and bone. The shrimp doesn't punch with its muscles directly. It uses its muscles slowly, over a second or two, to bend this spring and load it with potential energy, like drawing back a crossbow. A biological latch holds all of that stored energy in place. Then, in less than 3 milliseconds, the latch releases. The arm doesn't accelerate because the muscle is fast. It accelerates because the spring was never muscle in the first place. The result? A dactyl club moving at 12 to 23 meters per second, 40 to 50 miles an hour, inside a fluid roughly 800 times denser than air. To put that in perspective, that's the rough acceleration profile of a .22 caliber bullet leaving a gun barrel, generated by an animal with no gunpowder, no motor, and no bones. Here's the detail that even seasoned marine biologists find unsettling. Sometimes the mantis shrimp misses, and the prey dies anyway. To understand why, you have to understand what happens to water when something moves through it faster than the water can get out of the way. As the dactyl club rockets forward, it pushes water aside so violently that the fluid physically cannot rush back in fast enough to fill the space behind it. That creates a pocket, not of air, but of vapor. The local pressure drops below the vapor pressure of water itself, and for a fraction of a second, a bubble of vacuum-like emptiness exists in the ocean, right where the strike just happened. This is called cavitation. Submarine propeller designers spend careers trying to prevent it, because when these bubbles collapse, they release energy, a lot of it, in an instant. When the surrounding water pressure crushes that bubble back down, it collapses with such violence that it produces a secondary shockwave. And in that collapse, something even stranger happens. A flash of light. It's called sonoluminescence, and inside that microscopic implosion, temperatures spike to somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 Kelvin. That is close to the surface temperature of the sun, happening in a fraction of a second inside a coral reef generated by a shrimp. So the prey gets hit twice, first by the physical club, then, a fraction of a second later, by the shockwave of a collapsing vapor bubble that can stun or kill on its own, even if the club never made contact at all. Marine biologists call it, only half-jokingly, the 1-2 punch. This is an animal that, without any nervous system upgrade, without venom, without size, has weaponized a quirk of fluid dynamics that human engineers usually try to avoid. Humans see color using 3 types of photoreceptors: red, green, blue. Every color on your screen right now, every sunset, every painting, your brain built out of just 3 data points and some very sophisticated internal math called opponent processing. The mantis shrimp has between 12 and 16 distinct photoreceptor types, 12 dedicated to color, spanning a range from ultraviolet light all the way to near-infrared, wavelengths on both ends that are completely invisible to you. 4 more dedicated to something humans can't perceive at all: polarized light, including a rare form called circular polarization. When this was discovered, the story practically wrote itself. Headlines said the mantis shrimp could see millions of more colors than humans, a hyper-vivid alien rainbow beyond our comprehension. It's a great story. It's also wrong. In 2014, researchers led by Hannah Thoen ran behavioral trials training mantis shrimp to distinguish between different wavelengths of light. The results were almost embarrassing for an animal with 16 types of color receptors. The shrimp struggled to tell apart colors that were 12 to 25 nanometers apart on the light spectrum. Humans, with our measly 3 receptor types, can distinguish wavelengths as close as 1 to 5 nanometers apart. The animal with quadruple the color-sensing hardware has worse color vision than you do. So why build all those receptors just to waste them? Because the mantis shrimp isn't trying to see beautifully. It's trying to react instantly. Human vision is slow by comparison. Your brain takes signals from 3 receptor types and runs comparative calculations. We're blending and weighing them against each other to construct the sensation of, say, teal. That computation takes time. The mantis shrimp skips it entirely. Each of its 16 receptors acts like an independent, dedicated sensor, sending a direct, unprocessed signal straight to the motor system, a biological version of a yes or no switch, rather than a blended judgment call. It sacrifices nuance for speed, because an animal capable of launching a strike in 3 milliseconds does not have time to deliberate over color theory. It needs an instant trigger, not a paint palette. And there's a second layer to this vision system that has nothing to do with color at all: the polarization detection. Circularly polarized light is rare in nature, and almost nothing on Earth can perceive it the way mantis shrimp can. They use it as something close to a private communication channel with other members of their own species. Patterns on their bodies reflect polarized light invisible to predators, but glaringly obvious to another mantis shrimp. They also use it to detect prey that would otherwise be invisible, like a transparent jellyfish or camouflaged octopus skin, because even invisible flesh scatters polarized light in ways ordinary color vision cannot pick up. Each eye, on its own, is also doing something no human eye can do. A human eye needs a partner, 2 eyes, working together, triangulating distance, to produce depth perception. The mantis shrimp's eye is divided into 3 separate horizontal zones, all independently focused on the exact same point in space. That means a single eye, on its own, produces full 3D depth perception. It has 2 eyes. It effectively has 2 independent 3D depth mapping systems. mounted on stalks that rotate with 8 degrees of freedom, scanning 360 degrees around its body without ever having to turn. It is not exaggerating to say this animal carries a targeting computer where its eyeballs should be. Which raises an obvious question. If this creature can strike like a bullet and see like a military sensor array, how has it not destroyed itself? Every strike generates enough force to shatter its own prey. What stops it from shattering its own arm? This is the part of the mantis shrimp story that quietly ended up in aerospace labs. The impact face of the dactyl club is capped in hydroxyapatite, the same hard calcium mineral that makes up human teeth and bone. That's the part built to hit things. But hard materials share a universal weakness. They're brittle. Hit something hard enough, in the wrong way, and it doesn't bend, it shatters. So beneath that hard, striking surface, the shrimp builds something almost architectural. Layers of chitin fiber, stacked one on top of another, except each layer isn't aligned with the one below it. It's rotated by somewhere between 18 and 42 degrees, so that if you sliced through the whole structure and looked at it from the side, you wouldn't see straight lines. You'd see a spiral, twisting gradually through the material like a staircase. Scientists call this a Bouligand structure, or a helicoidal structure, and it fundamentally changes what happens when the material is struck. Here's why it works. In a normal material, a crack that starts from an impact travels in a straight line, because it's following a straight structural path of least resistance, and a straight running crack is a fast, catastrophic one. In the mantis shrimp's armor, there is no straight path. Every layer is angled differently from the one before it, so a crack that tries to propagate is forced to twist, redirect, and lose energy at every single layer boundary it crosses. The helicoidal geometry also acts like a filter for shear waves, the internal shock waves generated by a violent impact, scattering them before they can reach and damage deeper tissue. The result is an armor system that can absorb an estimated 50,000 or more strike cycles at 10,000 G of force without structural failure. Compare that to Kevlar or ceramic body armor plating, which is typically rated to survive 1 or 2 direct hits before it needs to be retired. This is not lost on the people who design armor for a living. Researchers at NIST and engineers working with the U.S. Air Force have been 3D printing carbon fiber and cellulose composites arranged in artificial Bouligand patterns, testing them as micrometeoroid shielding for satellites, as lightweight military plating, and even inside football helmets, where the same crack-twisting geometry has shown promise for reducing the kind of blunt impact that causes concussions. An animal that fits in the palm of your hand is currently informing how humans build spacecraft hulls. So by now, you might be doing the math that every viewer eventually does when they hear a story like this. If a 2-inch shrimp can punch like a bullet, see like a targeting computer, and wear armor NASA wants to copy, what happens if you just scale it up? This is where the story turns, because the answer is not, it would be unstoppable. The answer is that it would collapse and suffocate within seconds of existing. Picture scaling a Peacock Mantis shrimp, roughly 15 centimeters long, 100 grams, up to human size, 6 feet tall, around 80 kilograms, a linear scale-up of about 12 times. At first, the numbers sound like a monster movie. Strike velocity would theoretically reach into supersonic range in air. Impact force would balloon from 1,500 newtons to something in the neighborhood of 216,000 newtons, roughly 22 tons of force, enough to shatter reinforced concrete. But here's where the fantasy runs into a wall biologists call the square cube law, and it is one of the most unforgiving rules in all of biology. When you scale a creature up in size, its strength, which comes from the cross-sectional area of muscle and exoskeleton, only increases by the square of the scaling factor. Scale something up 12 times, and its structural strength increases by 12 squared, 144 times. But its mass, its weight, increases by the cube of that same factor, 12 cubed, 1,728 times. Strength goes up by 144. Weight goes up by 1,728. The gap between those two numbers is the reason a human-sized mantis shrimp could not stand up, let alone throw a punch. Its own exoskeleton, the same chitin that makes its armor so impressive at small scale, would buckle instantly under a body that heavy. This is the same reason ants can't be built the size of dogs, and why the biggest land animals on Earth all evolved thick, columnar legs instead of the spindly, efficient limbs of small creatures. And even if the legs somehow held, the shrimp would suffocate before it ever threw a punch. Mantis shrimp don't breathe with lungs. They exchange oxygen through filamentous gills attached to their abdominal legs, relying on a relatively simple, open circulatory system to move that oxygen through the body. That system is barely sufficient for an animal that weighs about as much as a deck of cards. It has no capacity whatsoever to keep an 80-kilogram body alive. There's no pump strong enough, no surface area large enough, built into that design. In other words, everything that makes the mantis shrimp terrifyingly efficient at its actual size is precisely what would guarantee its death at any larger size. The spring latch mechanism, the lightweight armor, the compact eyes, none of it scales. It is a creature perfectly, almost obsessively, optimized for exactly the size it already is, and not 1 millimeter more. There's something worth sitting with here. We spend a lot of energy imagining bigger, faster, stronger versions of the things that already impress us. Bigger sharks, bigger dinosaurs, bigger explosions. But the mantis shrimp is a quiet argument against that entire instinct. Its power was never a function of size. It was a function of an incredibly precise, almost obsessive engineering trade-off, sacrificing color nuance for reaction speed, sacrificing bulk for a spring-loaded mechanism, sacrificing raw material strength for a geometric trick that redirects force instead of resisting it. Human engineers are only now, in the last decade or so, starting to design the same way, favoring clever geometry and stored energy over brute force power in everything from body armor to camera sensors that detect cancer by reading polarized light bouncing off human tissue, the same trick the shrimp uses to spot a hidden jellyfish. Somewhere on a reef right now, an animal smaller than your thumb is holding a spring loaded tighter than anything humans have engineered at that scale. Watching the world through a vision system we still don't fully understand, wearing armor that outperforms Kevlar, and it has no idea any of that is remarkable. It's just trying to have lunch. Maybe that's the real lesson buried in a punching shrimp. The most extraordinary designs in nature were never built to be big. They were built to be exactly the right size for what they needed to do. And the moment you try to force them to be more, that's the moment they stop working at all. So the next time something looks unimpressive because of its size, it might be worth asking what it's actually capable of.